So welcome. We are so very glad that you joined us for this month's webinar. So every third Wednesday of the month, you'll find us here. STEM Education Works presents a webinar on some topic related to STEM and educational technology. So this month, we're going to be focusing on tips and strategies for finding grants that will help you finance your studio or your makerspace. Next month, make sure to come back because Dr. Jake will be back on, and he's going to be sharing about robotic arms and our brand new, well, new to us, newly released Foundations of Engineering, Technology, and Robotics curriculum. So make sure to be on the lookout for an introduction for that. My name is Corey. I know many of you, but if I haven't met you, hello and welcome. I am actually calling in from Eva Beach, Hawaii, which is where I live. So it's still morning time for me. I'm the director here of Curriculum Solutions at STEM Education Works. My background is in the classroom as a middle school science and math teacher. So I spent 25 years in the classroom, but the last 8 of those, I was the media specialist for 7th through 12th grade. So I went back and got my library degree and absolutely loved the last 8 years of my career. But now I am working with a great team here at STEM Education Works to create STEM curriculum and professional development opportunities for K-12 teachers. So I'm really excited now, and this is like the first time we get to introduce her publicly. I'm really excited to introduce you to my brand new team member and colleague, Chauntée Pitts. And Chauntée is our new professional learning specialist, and I'm going to have her just introduce herself to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Chauntée. Like she said, I'm the professional development specialist for STEM Education Works. I just left the classroom from teaching. I was previously a STEM specialist in Crowley, Texas, which is a little bit south of Fort Worth. And I moved to Lafayette, Indiana to do this job. So it was a pretty big change that just happened in my life. But I previously have also taught all subjects in 5th grade, all subjects in 3rd grade. And I was also a reading, I've been math and social studies teacher for 8th grade. So now I'm just fully focused on STEM. So I live and breathe all things STEM.
Okay, Chauntée, that one's you.
Okay, great. So we're going to go over obviously getting in grants. So we're going to make sure that we have a little bit of a understanding of how to sketch out your proposals. So reading the guidelines carefully is important. So making sure you understand the requirements and guidelines for the grant proposal. Just read it multiple times, make a checklist if you need to help you make sure that you cover everything you need to cover on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it probably seems obvious to anybody who's writing a grant, but it's really important that you know your audience, that you actually take a little bit of time and get to know them, because it's absolutely critical when you're granting or when you're writing a grant proposal. You want to be able to tailor your message and approach to their interests and priorities. So it's not one of those like cut and paste and you're going to use the exact same proposal for multiple organizations. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you know your audience and you're tailoring your message to their interests. And then along with that, when you're writing your proposal, it's always good to pop in some very specific information about their goals and values. You want to make sure you use language that resonates with them, and then present your ideas in a way that will capture their attention and support. So they're going to recognize right away if you've done your research, you've done some background homework, and you have actually learned a little bit about their vision. So you want to make sure you include language that reflects what they have on their website. So here's an example. If you're submitting a grant proposal to a foundation that focuses on maybe environmental conservation, you're going to want to make sure that you highlight the ways your project would impact the environment. And you're going to want to use language that talks about conservation efforts. So again, it probably seems silly, but you would not believe how many people kind of, and having been on grant committees, how many people just copy and paste kind of a generic proposal, and you don't want to do that. And then finally, if you know your audience, you automatically have a better ability to anticipate any objections they might have or concerns. And then you can address those in your proposal proactively.
When you find out.
So really what that comes down to is the better you know your audience, the better you can communicate your project and give value add to what you're asking from them. Chauntée?
Yes. So also along with that, you want to definitely develop a narrative for your proposal, making sure that you understand what exactly you're going to be doing. So making it clear, concise, and compelling. It should explain the problem you're addressing. Why is it important, not only to you, but to the people that you're going to be impacting, and also the people that you're asking this grant from, and making sure it's compelling. It should explain the problem you're addressing, why it's important, and how your project will solve the problem that you are trying to solve.
So our next tip before you even begin this process, when you're just beginning to sketch out your proposal, is to find what we call a proposal buddy. Now, that probably sounds goofy, but over my years of writing grants, the most positive experiences I've had, and really the most successful grant writing experiences I've had, were when I had a buddy, when I had somebody that was either writing with me or who agreed to be my maybe accountability partner or my buddy here. They may not be writing the grant, but then I would give them something in return, like maybe covering a class. But if you can find somebody that will work with you, there's a couple of things with that it'll do for you. The first is they'll give you a fresh perspective. So they can read through your proposal, they can give you constructive feedback, maybe any areas that would be unclear or confusing. Of course, they can help you with editing and proofreading, which is way more important than you think. They can catch typos and errors, and then just give you some suggestions for improvement. So that's one of the first things with a buddy, is they just give you a new perspective, and they're great for accountability. They'll help you set deadlines. You can check in on each other, make sure that you're making forward progress on your proposal. We'll talk a little more about dates in a few minutes, but those dates, staying on top of those dates, extremely important when you're writing a grant. And then finally, let's be real, writing grants is nobody's favorite job. I know there are positions that are actually grant writing positions, and I think that would be like a horror show, but it's just not the most fun thing in the world to do. But if you have a buddy, they can provide you some support, some emotional support when you're feeling like, I also don't want to do this anymore. They can help you stay motivated and remind you why what you're doing is important. Chauntée?
And finally, narrowing down the specific type of funding you're wanting to receive. So making sure you find a grant that fits your needs as best as you can. I mean, they're not always going to be completely aligned, but as much as you can get it aligned, that was going to increase your opportunity to obtain your funding. And if the project aligns, they're more likely to pick your project. So just making sure that you find the right fit for you.
And along with that, so I love that was the lead in from Chauntée. There are all kinds of different types of grants. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about those, because the reality is sometimes they're not going to match exactly with what you're doing, but with a little creativity, you can tap into some grants you may not have thought about. So I'm just going to go through a few of the different types to think about. So the first is a classroom grant. These are kind of the most obvious, but these are grants that are specifically designed for like classroom materials, for supplies, maybe equipment, things that are not covered in your typical school budget. So classroom grants are kind of the low-hanging fruit. Professional development grants may be something you hadn't thought about, but these are grants that are very specifically tailored for people looking to improve skills or learn new skills. So they provide funding for things like conferences, workshops, summer institutes, internships, things like that. The professional development grants will help you with that, especially if you're looking at environmental education. There are some incredibly cool professional development grants out there. Then there are STEM specific grants, and these are actually becoming more and more popular. So these are grants, obviously, that are designed to support anything that falls into those STEM subjects. So they'll provide funding for pretty much anything, but equipment, supplies, training. One that you may not think about, and I think maybe it's on my brain because of my library background, but literacy grants. So if you think about the ways that STEM and literacy intersect, there are a lot of projects and proposals that we can put together as STEM teachers that connect to literacy goals and objectives. So these will provide funding again for pretty much anything that talks about increasing literacy. And when you're talking about literacy, don't forget information literacy skills are just as important as what you think of as traditional literacy skills. So information and digital literacy, that's a great segue into literacy focused grants. Environmental education grants are huge. They are all over the place. If you're looking specifically to do something related to the environment, they'll support anything really related to environmental education and awareness in the classroom. So think about
not through the state
environmental education grant. Chauntée, can you grab that for me?
Yep, I got you.
The next one is arts education. Again, one that you may not really think about, but STEM, especially when you expand it to STEAM, we can connect and link into grants that are meant for arts education. So this is something that I actually was able to tap into with our art teacher at my last school. And we won a grant, a professional development grant that was actually under the arts education organization for Pennsylvania. So even though I'm a STEM teacher, because I was connected to an arts teacher and we were talking about virtual reality, I was able to apply and get the arts education grant. So think about really unusual intersections like that. And then finally, special education. So think about ways that your program, product, or curriculum supports the education of students with disabilities. And that is a great way to connect to special education grants. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the idea of levels of funding. So we have the different types of grants, and these are ways for you to begin to think about searching for grants. But now let's talk about grants going this way in terms of levels of funding. So basically there are 3 tiers of funding. The top one, we call them major grants. They're usually national in scope. So these are the largest, but they're also the most competitive. Now, when you're talking about a major grant, they tend to range from tens of thousands to even hundreds of thousands of dollars. They typically support really ambitious, sort of high impact projects, and they require significant resources and collaboration. They're great if you're wanting to implement a district-wide or school-wide project, but just be aware that you're getting a lot of money, but you're also going to have to give high levels of accountability and probably significant data collection. So that's kind of a balance on those major grants. So we're going to talk about a few of those specifically in a minute, but that's just something to keep in mind. The next level is mid-level. So these tend to be state or region-wide. They still are looking at significant amounts of money, but more like the several thousand to tens of thousands of dollars. These are typically intended to support your larger scale projects like implementation of a new curriculum or maybe purchase of equipment. And you'll still have accountability, you'll still have data collection, but generally not at that same level of scrutiny that you're going to get for those major grants. So mid-level grants, think statewide. And then finally, mini grants tend to be very local in focus. So these are like your education foundation grants. Most school districts have an education foundation that's attached to it, and they will offer a couple of $100 to a couple of $1,000 for projects that are very local in nature. They are intended to support really small scale projects like classroom supplies or maybe professional development opportunities like conferences. Now, you will be accountable to the funding organization, but the application and the workload tends to be much smaller than like a mid-level or a major grant. So keep those things in mind when you're starting to look for and apply for grants. How much money are you looking for? How much work do you want to put into that grant? And sort of balance that out. By the way, I just wanted to highlight, we do have a page on our website, stemeducationworks.com/grants, and we keep an updated list of grants that you can sort by state or national grants. So please check that out. We're adding to that constantly. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of each of those levels of grants. You will be getting this list, you'll be getting these slides after the webinar today. So don't worry about trying to write these down or keep track of them. We will be sending you a copy of that. But the first place, and you probably, if you've even dipped your toe into grant finding, then you probably know this, but the place you might want to start for those big grants is grants.gov. So this is a central platform for applying for federal grants. And it actually connects you to 26 different federal grant-making agencies. So you can search for grants using their keyword search, or specific agencies. And then you can also use their portal to go ahead and download and also submit your application and your updates through their portal. So another good resource for major and mid-level grants is the NEA Foundation. Their goal is to support educators' effort to develop new skills and knowledge. So they're very heavily focused on professional development opportunities. And they support a wide range of those activities, including things like action research, mentoring experiences, conference attendance, that sort of thing. Their grants range from about $2,000 to $5,000 and can be used for a lot of things that other grants can't. So things like they'll cover travel and materials, registration fees. So some grants will not cover that sort of thing. The NEA Foundation is great for that sort of grant. And then you also think about your national level teaching organizations like the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the National Science Teachers Association, the National Computer Science Teachers Association. Almost all of them have some kind of grant available on a yearly basis for educators who are part of their organization and are looking to implement new programs, especially that support that organization's mission and goals. So I won't lie and say that I never joined an organization just to apply for a grant, because I have, and I also have won a few of those. So don't forget those national organizations. And then finally, there are big companies that provide grant opportunities for educators. So I listed a few here. These are just kind of the big ones that people tend to gravitate towards. Lowe's Toolbox for Education, the Toshiba America Foundation. And then I wanted to highlight an option. Did not work for me, but I do know teachers that it worked very well for, and that is crowdsourcing, like Donors Choose. So just be really careful to check with your district's policy on that before you set one up. And I know that from hard experience after taking the time to set one up and then being corrected for not being allowed to do that. So just check on that, but I know that there are many districts who are okay with their teachers crowdsourcing funding. So keep that in mind. And again, check out our grants page on our website. Then we're going to talk for just a minute about some state organizations that you might want to consider on this journey. So most states have a statewide education agency. So I was in Lancaster County, PA for the last part of my teaching career, and our kind of governing agency was PSEA, and they awarded grants every year to PA teachers. So definitely be looking in your statewide education organization, whatever that is. And then also, we talked about those national teaching organizations like, the National Science Teachers Association. They all have statewide chapters as well. And those statewide chapters also provide grants for teachers in their state. So I have just a couple of examples on here, like Georgia has their own chapter of the National Science Teachers Association. And every year they provide grants for members in their state. Another one that I actually didn't know about until I really started digging in and applying to grants was Retired Teachers Association. So every state has one. These don't tend to be very large grants, but they're also not difficult to get. So if you look up for your state, the Retired Teachers Association, and then look for their grant page, you'll often find a couple of $100s to a few $1,000 grants available. I included in my slides an example of the California Retired Teachers Association website. And then finally, check your statewide PTO or PTA organization. They also tend to provide mid-level grants for teachers in their state. And then finally, let's look at a couple of local organizations that you may not have tapped into yet for grant writing. So one of the ones that was the most surprising to me, but it is literally everywhere, are your electric companies and co-ops. So these companies regularly provide funding for teachers. So I actually kind of fell into this when I was teaching science, and I won a full curriculum around electricity. So they will fund projects, they'll fund curriculum that relate generally to environmental education. And they usually are mini grants around $1,000, but they're definitely worth checking out. And then also most banks and credit unions will provide mini grants for their members. So it's definitely worth looking into if you're a member of your local bank or a local credit union. I was looking into this fairly recently, and as really the only requirement was that you were a member of their bank. So look into mini grants for teachers through those as well. Then you also have your foundations and nonprofits. So these are organizations with a very specific vision or goal, and they provide small grants for community members. So a couple of examples, like the Seattle Foundation, the New York Community Trust, the Chicago Community Trust, and then the American Association of University Women. So these are just a few, but there are thousands and thousands of examples of foundations and nonprofits. Local businesses are another way that you can tap into your local community, and these tend to be very small projects in scope, but also very useful. So for an example, when I was teaching in the library, I wanted to create mini green screens for my students. And so I had seen something, I think it was on Pinterest, about using pizza boxes for your little green screens. So I went to a local pizza place that was across the street from my middle school. And I just asked them, would you be willing to partner with me on this project? They were more than happy to donate all the supplies, including the paint and the boxes and all the things. They were happy to do it. And all I needed to do was tag them in social media. So again, a very small scale project, but if you have something very specific in mind, I would absolutely consider going to your local business owners and asking if they would be willing to participate. So once you've located your source of funding, it's time to actually write the proposal. Chauntée?
All right, so we're going to go over just a couple of key strategies for writing your grant to hopefully help you feel inspired. Next slide for me. So typically the first thing that is going to be read is your mission statement. And so I gave you like a little prompt at the bottom, which is just a idea for you, but creating a mission statement that's unique, but also incorporates who you are, who your students are, what you're trying to accomplish, and who you'll impact with the project. So it serves as the heart of both your cause and your fundraising strategy. So for this example, the mission of, and then you could put whatever name you want to put in there for what the mission is to primary purpose as goes there, and then by providing and your primary function of activities to and who are your stakeholders. And so Corey, if you click for the next one for me, it'll pop up an example of what I mean by that at the bottom. So this is just like an example of what that looks like filled out. This is a biology degree program, but the concept is there. And that just kind of gives you an idea as to what other people have used in the past. Next slide for me. So then you also want to have goals, and you're going to also want to have objectives. So the goal is like a broad statement of what you wish to accomplish. Goals are broad and general and usually intangible and also abstract. A goal is really about the final impact or outcome that you wish to bring about. In the case of goals for a grant proposal, make sure that you're linked back to your need statement. Like, what are you needing? Use words like decrease, deliver, develop, establish, improve, increase, produce, and provide. Those are kind of some examples. Also with an objective though, you're going to want to take a step towards accomplishing a goal. So in contrast to the goal, an objective is the narrow part of it, the precise, the tangible, the concrete, and it can be measured. For example, by the end of the year one, provide 125 mothers in Northwest Louisiana with a 2-hour training program that will provide health and nutrition information. So it's just very like, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. That's the goal of writing an objective. Next slide. So for this part, we also, I know you probably already know that you need to have a timeline, but it's hard to kind of judge it necessarily complete, but giving yourself a rough estimate of like, what do I plan to accomplish at this point? When am I going to start? How long is it going to take? And when you're going to present the end results. Also permission, there's a limited number of state and federal grants like that your school can apply to. So making sure you know before you start doing all the work and then find out that you can't get this, that would be really frustrating. So we want to make sure that we know what we need to get permission for. What materials are you going to need to be successful? And also the cost of those materials and anything else that you need to purchase for your success. Next slide. And then also people, like determine who you're going to need help with in the project. So if it's school personnel, are you going to need community members helping you? If there's anyone that you're thinking that needs to be involved in that, making sure that you determine who that is beforehand, so you know who to reach out to help you be successful. And finally, an assessment. How are you going to assess the project? Is it going to be summative? Is it going to be formative? What is this is success look like? Go ahead.
That's a lot of information that we threw at you, but we want to kind of pull together just a few things that we recommend you keep in mind as you're going into this process. So Chauntée touched on this a little bit, but just keep in mind that you're going to be asked for data collection. All grants are going to require some kind of data collection. So we talked about earlier, the bigger the grant, the more data you're going to need to collect. But what kind of data is going to depend on the grant. Generally, there are a few parameters you're going to want to keep in mind. They're generally going to ask for things like student data, especially if you're using funding for a new program or curriculum. That kind of data might look like test scores or grades, behavior records, that sort of thing. And most grants are going to require some sort of demographic data. So this is going to look like race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, maybe English language proficiency. So keep that in mind that this is the kind of data they're going to ask for. Another data point will be budget. So you're going to be asked to create a projected expense report, and then you'll have to follow that up with an actual record of your expenses. So my key here is do not throw away any receipts. So screenshot everything, take pictures of all receipts, don't lose your receipts. Finally, you're going to be asked to collect data on the effectiveness of whatever it was that this organization funded. So this could look like post-project surveys or test scores or portfolios, but you're going to be wanting to collect that data throughout the life of that grant so that you can demonstrate the success of your project. And the reason that's really important is because some grant funding organizations will actually offer you future grants based on the success of this grant. So it's really important to keep records of that. And then in the same way, and Chauntée mentioned this as well, all grants are going to require some kind of time frame. So it's really important to keep that time frame in mind throughout that life cycle of the grant. So add them to your calendar, set reminders, but a few things that you're going to want to think about at the beginning of this process in terms of time frame, the grant period. So there's going to be a period of time that the grant runs through. That's important because if you don't spend those funds during that grant cycle, you're likely to lose the grant money. So be really, really careful about what that grant period looks like. Reporting deadlines. Many grants require regular reporting throughout the life cycle of the grant. So you're going to want to make sure you're aware of those deadlines and make sure you're collecting and analyzing your data as you go so you can complete those reports on time. There are always budget deadlines, so you're going to want to keep that in mind. The expense proposal at the beginning, some grants are going to require you to submit receipts as you go, and all grants are going to require you to submit a final budget at the end of the grant cycle. Also, program implementation date. So if you're doing a specific program or a specific curriculum, most grant funding organizations are going to want to know when training sessions are scheduled, if you have specific materials that need to be distributed. So keep track of those dates. And then finally, like I mentioned a second ago, some grants are actually renewable. So you want to make sure that you keep track of the dates for and deadlines for submitting an application for a renewal of your grant. Chauntée?
And then the last thing that we have on here is feedback and narrative. So I know we were talking about data collection, but also it's important that you spend some time making sure you're documenting the project as it goes along, because at the end, a lot of times they're going to want you to give them feedback on how it went, a narrative of like, this is the way that it went with my students, this is what it looked like. And then also having maybe the students write something about the project that they learned, or whoever's doing the project, having them write something that you can give to the people who have provided you the grant, so that way they can feel that they are a part of what happened and see what really went down and how it took place. And that provides you with a positive relationship that's going to give you future opportunities with the people that you're working with.
I absolutely love that. I think that's especially important for your mini grants and your mid-level grants, because they really are relationships. So I love that piece of advice. Well, that actually brings us to the end of our content for today's webinar, but we're kind of at the end of our time, but we'll stick around for a few minutes. If anyone has questions, we would love to have you ask those now. So you can either put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question, whatever you are more comfortable with. And Chauntée, I'll manage the chat.
All right.
Any questions about grants or comments
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so you all have these meetings, you said every third Wednesday of the month.
Yes.
Is it possible to get on a mailing list?
Absolutely, 100%. I think we have our email, right? Yeah, there we go on the screen. If you want to just send us an email, it's actually Chauntée and I are the two that will answer those emails. So
Yes.
if you would just send us an email and say, can you make sure I'm on that list? We would be more than happy to get you there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also my second question is, do you all have a library where I can go back and watch previous recordings? Because you all were very good today.
Oh,
Thank you.
well, thank you. We love that question. Actually, yes. So it's all on our YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube and just look for STEM Education Works, you'll see the videos from the last year. It might go back further than that. I'm not sure, but at
There's
least
a
this
decent
year's. There's pretty good. Yeah, it's a pretty good
So
list.
if you're struggling to find it, just in your email, say, can you send us the YouTube channel, and we'll send it to you if you're struggling to find it.
Thank you.
No
I
problem.
love that question.
Yep.
Any other questions? We're happy to answer them about our own experiences. And if you are an Indiana teacher, I should have mentioned this in the main part of our webinar, but if you're an Indiana teacher, one of our strongest partners here that we work with is the I'm going to get this wrong, Indiana Manufacturing Association Competitive Center, INMAC. And they do yearly mini grants for anybody even slightly connected to STEM fields. So it's INMAC, INMAC. They do, I believe their mini grants are $2,000. They have quite a few available every year. We work very closely with their team. They are excellent. And then they also do much larger grants that we partner with them on for full studio spaces. So make sure to go to the INMAC website if you're in Indiana and you're interested in STEM spaces. All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and bring it to a close so we don't take too much of your time. But again, we just want to thank you so much for joining us for this month. Don't forget, next month is Dr. Jake back again. I think last time he did his Star Wars and Glowforge presentation, which was a lot of fun if you want to look that up. But again, next month he'll be looking at robotic arms in our new curriculum for high school that's called the Foundations of Engineering, Technology, and Robotics. So we'll be sending out invitations for that usually the first week of each month. So be looking for that. And again, for this webinar, we'll be sending out the recording and all the resources in the next day or two. So be looking for that. All right, thanks again. And we're going to go ahead and close our webinar. We hope to see you next month. Thank you so much.